Alright, why did God make farts smell? So that deaf people can enjoy them too. Alright, well, I'm doing my speech on the deaf culture. It's important to me. I've actually been signing for about 1.5 years now. My girlfriend's mother's deaf, and ever since I've been, introduced to this culture, it's kind of opened my eyes. In your lives, in a restaurant or something, you probably interact with, maybe a deaf person around. So next time, you'll see deaf people have been around for just about as long as humans, except they've been ignored in history, and we'll see when. Today I'll map out the family and social interpretations of the deaf culture in the ancient, Renaissance, and modern era. In order to become more aware of the deaf culture in today's society, you'll need to know a little bit more about its history. This is actually, according to an encyclopedia called Naturalis Historiae. It was published in about 80 AD. It's actually one of the longest surviving encyclopedias. But the first recorded deaf person, his name is Quintus Pedius. He was a nephew of Julius Caesar. He was educated because of his wealth. He was educated to be a painter. But no formal, language was created, yet. He's actually lucky because people during this time were shunned away from even the family, and they were definitely not integrated into the society. But he was actually one of the luckier deaf people. You usually kick them out. Deaf people were considered to be lame at this time, for society, and they were never integrated into the dominant culture. After looking at the ancient history, I'd like to move a little bit forward into the Renaissance period. During this time, in 1620, Juan Pablo Bonet published this thing called Reducción de las Letras y Arte para enseñar a hablar a los mudos, which is just the reduction of arts and letters for teaching deaf people how to sign, or the deaf how to sign, actually. He created the first language that actually incorporated the language into signs that you could understand. For example, it's not just like pointing at something and saying a chair. It's actually, there's an alphabet that went along with the language itself. He set out a method of oral education for the deaf by means of manual sign, and used the alphabet. This is almost current. In the American Sign Language, other than the missing letters here, it's pretty close to what we have today. Due to his innovation, the acceptance of deaf culture was only created in just the family, not too much in society. It just gave gave parents of deaf children a reason not to kick them out. They could actually teach them something if they were willing, obviously, but they had to be educated in the first place, which not many at this time were. You guys might know maybe a famous deaf piano player by the name of Ludwig van Beethoven. He actually became deaf, but it was more accepted after these times. In the Renaissance period, all of the innovations, it was a pivotal point for the deaf culture, especially for their change into from the ancient times to the modern times today. I want to see actually how the deaf culture is in our society. This is actually called the Deaf Expo. I went to one in Ontario where I got this shirt. It's really interesting. The culture is just a lot bigger than you guys think. You see maybe a deaf person here and there, but they're everywhere. At this Deaf Expo, it's a social gathering, but on the outsides of the expo, they have like social awareness type things. Because not a lot of deaf people are educated, they get kind of scared or nervous to try to communicate with anybody. But they go to these deaf expos, meet other deaf people, feel more comfortable, and they're able to enjoy life really. At these expos, they offer things like we talk on the phone regularly, and for deaf people, there's a thing called video relay service. It's like FaceTime on your iPhone 4s almost, except it's through like an internet router, and it's directed straight to your TV. So people call a landliner, let's say, you can click the button, it displays the screen on the TV, you can sign. If you're speaking directly to the person, then if you're speaking directly to the person, then it's just you and you signing. But let's say the person needs to talk to a, let's say they have insurance problems, they call the insurance company. They'll call a certain, the VRS, it's a company. They'll call them, an interpreter will answer, and then they'll call the company for them, and through the video relay service, they will contact whoever you need to be contacted with. Also, deaf people have a lot of rights, not specifically just for deaf people, but some are focused more towards them. According to the ADA, deaf people or hospitals are required to provide translators for the deaf people. So if they walk into a hospital and they need help of some sort, they have to help them, and the hospital is required to provide a translator for them. Also, in the family life, for the deaf people, now that there's language available to everybody, they also have schools. For example, in Riverside, there's a high school called Riverside School of the Deaf. They support from 4th graders all the way up through high school. They have a completely, not all the staff are deaf, but like the football games, they also have football too. The football, they actually have a deaf coach, and it was really interesting. They also have the United States has the only university for the deaf. It's in Washington, D.C. I can't remember the name. It's Gallaudet. It's really hard to say. But they offer higher education for deaf people. Here at Fullerton, I would talk to the DDS, the Student Disability Service Center. I talked to them, and they actually offer interpreters here for deaf people, so deaf people could be in one of your classes. I don't know if I've never been in one, but maybe you guys have been in one where there's an interpreter helping out for the special needs student. And I know Mr. Kirkland's been in a class, plenty of classes at Cal State Northridge where they have a huge deaf program there, and every class mostly is interpreted for the deaf and focused for the deaf culture. Due to all these cultural advancements, deaf people they don't try to hide away from society anymore. They've been almost integrated completely. It's just that the main culture doesn't see them as often or gets accustomed to them at all. As you can see, it's been pretty rough for the deaf culture. They started off completely shunned from their society and family in the ancient times, and then once a language was created, then they were more accepted, but just in the family, not too much in society. Now they accept it in society as a whole. I actually have a quote. I'm going to leave you with a quote, and I hope you've enjoyed my time, but it says, it's from Mark Twain. It says, "Kindness is a language that the deaf can hear and the blind can see." Thank you.
All right, Darius, you're taking the place there. So, what did you think?
I thought it was a well-informed speech. He clearly knew a lot about the topic. He did a lot of research. He had a lot of information in there, and he really explained well how deaf folks back in sort of ancient times really were alienated from society, whereas now they're just integrated and are just a regular part of society. If I was to pick up on a weakness, it might be that sometimes it seemed as though he hit like a roadblock and he'd have to turn back to his paper where he'd look for a couple seconds. But apart from that, wasn't really that major in my opinion. That's just like I have to pick up critique. Other than that, I think it was a good speech. He opened it well with a funny little joke, and yeah, decent speech.
All right. Yeah, the tasteless joke is funny, and it gets our attention. We know where you're going then, and you do a good job creating a personal justification for talking about this. I think you could use a little bit more information when you were talking about the modern deaf culture, and you mentioned the, what is it, not the festival, but the Expo, that's it. You mentioned the Expo. One of the first things that popped in my head was, okay, well, how many deaf people are there in the country? You know, how many, you know, and it was just one of those things, a little bit more background information would be useful in various and sundry places. What you talked about was fine, but it often felt a little thin, and with a little more context, I think it would be more meaningful. It was pretty clear that we had this historical development. You've got particular time periods that you're talking about, so it's very easy to follow. And the movement between the points is relatively clear. Sometimes I think we could use a little bit more of a transition because it did seem like we were jumping the centuries here and there. And there might be good reason for those, you know, big blank spaces, and I think that that's one of those places where a transition could help you sort of explain that. The visuals are satisfactory. They don't really add a lot to our understanding of the subject, but they do give us a reminder about where we are at any point in the speech. The expo that you're showing, for instance, I don't get anything from that. It looks like any audience of people sitting there, so I'm not sure what it is that we're supposed to get out of that, what's unique about it. And so that it didn't seem to help much. And what was really strange was that was the one that you looked at the most. You know, it seemed like every time you were hesitant about where you were going next, you went back and looked at that picture behind you on the screen, like, okay, if I look at that, I'm going to know what it is I'm talking about. And I kept looking at it going, what is he getting from that as he's looking at it? I wasn't quite sure. So that was a little bit odd. I thought you did a nice job delivering the speech. You talked to us for the most part, like I said, with those a few exceptions where you had to turn back. And I thought you kept it at a level that was appropriate for the audience. Like I said, maybe a little bit more content on each of the points, some statistical information, a couple of other instances, those sorts of things, but it worked fine. All right, thank you.